Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a book recommendation video, and since it is the Asian Readathon right now and the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, if I said that correctly, in the US right now, I thought we could talk about books that I loved from Asian authors. And this is obviously a very broad category. There is a lot of countries that are included in the continent of Asia, and obviously there is a lot of people that have migrated to different countries like the US or countries in Europe but have like Asian heritage basically. So this is such a broad category, and that's why I have a lot of books to talk about. I'm breaking it down by genres, so hopefully you can just see whatever you enjoy reading and find a good recommendation. And I would also love to hear what some of your favorite books by Asian authors are, because I found that I usually really enjoy reading books by Asian authors. So the first genre mix I want to start off with is literary fiction and historical fiction. I meshed those together because I think sometimes it is a little bit like unclear which is which to me. And this is also the largest category, because even though fantasy is my favorite genre, I always find that I read a lot of literary fiction as well. So let's get started with those. The first one I wanted to mention is the most recent book that I have finished, and that is Sweet Bean Paste by Durian Sukegawa. And this is a very short book, so you can fly through it within a day or two. And it tells the story of three very unlikely people meeting in Japan. We have a man who has been to prison, but he's now working in some kind of like a food store basically, so he's preparing this like very specific dish that uses sweet bean paste. And he meets an older woman who offers to work for the store and to make her very special sweet bean paste for the recipe. And at first he doesn't really want that, but over the course of that time they become friends and they actually learn quite a lot about each other. And I thought this was a very touching and heartbreaking story, and it has this like melancholy but hopefulness, and it talks about a very specific theme that I don't want to give away because I didn't know that this is what this was about. But yeah, it deals with the way we exclude certain people from society because of our fears and what that does to those people, and I think it was beautiful. The next book has been a very long time since I've read it, many years, but it is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. I have her next novel on my TBR, and I'm just always annoyed with myself that I don't read her other books, because this first one was brilliant. We're following this Asian American family, and I don't know if it's the oldest daughter, but one of the daughters has disappeared and is found dead. And this is a mixture of a little bit of mystery, but mostly a family drama, a look at this family and the way that the kind of pressures in immigrant families can be so hard for the children and what that does to their mental health and stuff like that. And I just really enjoyed this book, and as I said, I need to read the rest because I'm very sure that I will love them as well. Then another book that really stayed with me is Pachinko by Jin Lee. This is probably a little bit more historical fiction, so we're following a family during the time before, during and after the Second World War. It's a Korean family, but they migrate to Japan. And this book is so great. I really can't say enough good things about it. I thought the way it dealt with all of these themes and just the way that Korean people were alienated and discriminated against is portrayed so vividly in this book. And we see most of it through the lens of this very strong young woman who was born during a time when women were not supposed to be strong and have their own hopes and dreams. And yeah, it's just fantastic. Pachinko is so great, I highly recommend. Then one that actually really surprised me when I read it, and yeah, I don't know, I just never hear people talk about it a lot, but that was Miracle Creek by Angie Kim, and Angie Kim actually has a book coming out this year, so I'm very intrigued to read it and see how I like it. But Miracle Creek is a book about, again, an Asian American family who have this like treatment facility where they're doing like, I think, some kind of like an oxygen treatment, and this is not really like an approved method, but basically it is said to cure a ton of different illnesses. But we start the book with a tragedy that happens and actually someone dies, and we're kind of like looking at the whole like procedural drama that happens after that, trying to figure out what happened, who's at fault, and basically why there were deaths involved with this like treatment. I really liked it. I think, again, this was such a great look at immigrant families and the way that they're under so much pressure, and also the way that between the generations there's so much pressure, and just the way that the realities of these people, especially, you know, the like kids and the parents, are so different because of the way they perceived this like immigration process. I really loved it, and I think it is a very interesting discussion. It talks a lot about parenthood, especially parenthood when you have a special needs child, and obviously I can't say whether that portrayal is good, but I just felt it was very multifaceted, and that's what I liked about it. Then very, very different, but again a little bit more historical, is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nghi. You could probably also say that this is speculative because it does have magical elements, but they're very minor. And in the core, this is a Great Gatsby retelling, but from the perspective of Jordan, and she is actually an Asian woman. And I loved it. I love this book so much. Nghi is such an amazing author, and I really want to reread this book. I just feel like it had, for me personally, the perfect amount of like retelling The Great Gatsby and then adding on to it, and just the like little bit of magic that was sprinkled in there also just, I don't know, elevated the story for me. So it worked very well for me, even though I know that it is very, very specific and not for everyone. Then we have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I think this book is very famous. A lot of people have read it, but I still wanted to put it on the list because I think it is such a unique take. And I don't want to really say what this book is about, even though I feel like a lot of people already know. But yeah, we have a group of characters who live in a very secluded kind of facility. They are only allowed out into the open world on very rare occasions, and we just see their lives and why that is. And it has this a little bit of a sci-fi element, and I think what Kazuo Ishiguro does really well is raise these like very deep questions about humanity while exploring these like literary sci-fi stories, I would say. I also really like Clara and the Sun, but I think I just like Never Let Me Go a little bit more. Very, very different again, and again more historical, is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This is my favorite book by the author, but I would also highly recommend The Kite Runner. But this is, so 1,000 Splendid Suns is a book that focuses on Afghanistan, and we're following the fate of two women who are kind of forced together in a way, but find a deep friendship and support within each other in very, very horrible times, especially considering the more recent history of Afghanistan. I think that just reading this book, it really shows the tremendous changes that have happened in this country over the last decades, and that it just never gets any rest, basically, and the people who live there have to go through so much. And this book portrayed that perfectly, but I also really loved this look at female friendship and female strength in those times. It was fantastic. So yeah, I love this book. And last but not least, the only YA book that I have for this genre, and also it is historical fiction, and that is We Are Not Free by Traci Chee. This is a book about the Japanese, what are they called, like encampments. Like after Pearl Harbor, a lot of like Asian and especially Japanese people were brought into these encampments and they were basically not let out in the US. And this book looks at this event from very, very different perspectives. So we have like a whole group, I think it's like 14 or something perspectives of teens that all know each other in some way or other, and we go through their perspectives on this event and how that changes their lives, how also how varied the reaction to this was, depending on, for example, how much they identified with the US before that happened. And yeah, it's just heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Okay, the next category will be very, very short, and that is romance. I only have 2 books and only one is a real romance, I would say, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandanna. This book I adored. This is a fantasy romance where we're following a real witch, and in this world the witches are not supposed to be together in one place, but our witch that we're following is asked to take care of 3 little girls who are also witches, and they need a tutor basically. And so chaos ensues, but also love ensues, and it's just cozy fantasy romance. It's beautiful. Read it. The other book is Love Marriage by Monica Ali. I guess this is also like literary fiction slash a little bit of romance. Like I have a hard time putting this into a category, but this is basically mess. This book is about a young woman who is a mess, and that's the kind of like literary romancy stories that I really, really enjoy. She has a boyfriend or a fiance who is basically perfect. He's exactly what her parents wanted for her, and we start the book when his parents and her parents meet for the first time to start discussing wedding stuff. And from there it all starts falling apart, and it's just so messy. It feels so real. It feels yeah, just authentic, the way that, you know, in your 20s you come to that moment where you think you've all figured out and then something happens and it all crumbles to pieces, and you realize that maybe you did not have it all figured out, but you were just trying to adhere to what society expected of you, but that's actually not what you really want. And so I love this book. It was really, really good, and I would highly recommend if you like the mess. Moving on to my favorite genre, we're talking about fantasy. And the last fantasy book from an Asian author that I finished, also one of my absolute new favorites, is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty series. I still have to read the rest of the books. They're massive, but I can't wait because this first book was so great. This is a high fantasy series inspired by Chinese history. And it follows this empire that starts falling apart, and there is a huge power struggle between different players who want to run the empire or separate it into smaller kingdoms again. It's fantastic. Then we have a novella to balance out the big book, and that is The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi. Also a very recent read, but one that I absolutely loved. I also need to read the rest of this series. I think there's also a new book coming out very soon, maybe this year or maybe next year. So yeah, there is more in this world. But this is basically the story of a cleric who goes around and collects stories. And they come to this palace of an empress who's just passed away, and they meet an older woman who can tell tales of her youth when she was working for the empress. And it's a great story about, again, female strength and female connection, and I loved it. Then a series that I read last year and I can't stop thinking about is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda. So great. This is such a great fantasy series. This is basically more like urban fantasy, so it is set in a completely fictional world, but it feels more urban, especially in the first book, because we're looking at this city that is basically run by different clans, and we have two big clans, and those are the Greenbones, because they can use a special jade to enhance powers, so they can be like super fast or super strong and stuff like that because of this jade. And we're basically following one of those clan families as they struggle for power with the other clan family. And so it has a very big scope in the end, like we're looking at this whole generation of this family, and also it opens up the world in the sequels a lot too. And I loved it. It's such a fantastic world, and even though I struggled a little bit with the first book, by the end I was totally hooked. And I think there is now a short story collection about some of these characters, so I need to read that. There's also a novella that I recently read and absolutely loved, set in the same world. It's great. And lastly, for fantasy, I have Girl, Serpent, Thorn by Melissa Bashardoust. Again, this is such a great book. We're basically following this princess who has kind of a curse, or there's just a reason why she can't leave her palace. She's very isolated and she feels very lonely, and during the story she has to come to terms with that. She thinks that she found a way to cure herself, and that might open up more problems than it actually solves. And it's so great. I love the whole mythology and the world and the characters, and we have a beautiful female-female romance at the core of it. And yeah, it's just beautiful. Moving on from that, we have graphic novels and manga, and I'm not gonna go into great depth with these, I hope, I try. The first one is my absolute favorite kind of graphic novel comic series, the only one that I'm currently like religiously following, and that is Monstrous by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. This is a fantasy, like a high fantasy kind of series where we follow a world with like two different kinds of people. We have the, what are they called? Arcanics? Something like that? I forget the terminology, but they're basically humans with like animals kind of mashed together because they are the descendants of certain gods. And then we have the humans, and they're at war with each other, and we basically follow all of that through the eyes of a main character called Maika Halfwolf, and she has one of those ancient gods inside her. And I love it. It's so gritty, it's so dark, a lot of like strong women, a lot of women-loving women. It's amazing, it's glorious. I can highly recommend. Then we have Chee's Sweet Home by Konami Kanata. This is a series that I also follow because my best friend always gives me these books and they're so cute. It's basically a kind of middle grade manga series about a cat called Chee, and she gets lost, she loses her mom, and she's found by this very adorable family who decide to take her home. But this family is actually not allowed to have pets, so they try to hide her, and just, you know, it portrays the way that this family now lives with this small cat that they had no plans of adopting, but who very quickly becomes part of the family. The other two are non-fiction graphic novels and manga, and that will transition us nicely into the broader non-fiction area. So the first one is Persepolis by Marianne Satrapi, and I really like this one. This portrays the Iranian Revolution, so we basically see through the eyes of this woman who is still a young child when this happens or starts happening, how Iran changes with the revolution, how they were fighting for more of a socialist state, but instead get this Islamic state. And the girls that already had some freedoms are forced back into these very traditional roles. They have to wear headscarves again and stuff like that. And how this feels for this young girl who was brought up by very left parents who were so hopeful for their country, and now also know people who are basically hunted by this new regime as like opponents. And yeah, it's a very heartbreaking book. I especially loved the first part. I think the second part, when she is older and moves to Austria, it was still interesting, but yeah, I don't know. I like the first part a lot more because I guess I also like these like childhood stories more than like the rebel teen phase, because that can be very painful as well. And then one that I recommend, but I give the biggest trigger warning or content warning for, because it is so heartbreaking. And if I tell you what it's about, I guess that is obvious, but I think if you read it, it's even worse than you might think. And that is Barefoot Gen by Keiji Nakazawa. This is a manga about Hiroshima. So we are following this family of a young boy, Jen, who lives in Hiroshima during the Second World War. And in the first one we basically have the lead up, so we see how life was during the Second World War for like the normal people, like who were not involved with the military or anything like that, how suppressed any kind of opposition was, and how dire it was that they didn't have any food. And yeah, we just see how they try to remain kind of normally living, I guess. And obviously we know what will happen at the end, and it makes it like even more heartbreaking, I guess. And so at the end of the first book we then have the bomb, and it was one of the most harrowing things I've ever read. But I think something that if you can stomach it is worth thinking about, especially with the way our world works. So yeah, definitely, as I said, big content warning for this one. And now we're going into the non-fiction category, and again this one is quite large, but I will try to keep it short. I think I can put these into different categories, and the first one I want to talk about is more like memoirs that are about people fleeing their countries or that have to leave their countries because the political situation there and stuff like that. So first of all, we have two books that are very similar and also complement each other very well. That is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park and The Girl with Seven Names by Hyun-seo Lee. These are both about young women who escape from North Korea for very different reasons with very different family backgrounds. And that's why I think they complement each other very well, because they show that no matter where your family stands in a country like that, you're never safe. And I also think that their journeys are different, but you can see certain similarities. And so I would definitely recommend them both if you're interested in those kind of stories. They talk about the kind of just the mental effects of having to flee your own country, but also how other people take advantage of that, how vulnerable you are, especially as a woman when you're a refugee, and how horrible a situation that is. And so similarly, I have Nujeen by Nujeen Mustafa. This is also a book about a girl who has to flee. She's fleeing from Syria to Germany, and so this is obviously a different region, but like similar themes of just how hard it is to leave your own country and to seek refuge somewhere else. And then the additional thing is that Nujeen is in a wheelchair, so there's obviously even more problems with this what do you call that? Flight? No, it's not a flight. You know what I'm trying to say. English sometimes is hard. And then the last one in that kind of category is I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai. So when she was young, she was an activist against the Taliban, and she tried to stand up for girls' rights for education until she was actually shot by the Taliban. And so I think now she lives in the UK, and yeah, this is a book that tells that story about standing up, fighting for your rights, and yeah, oppressive systems, I guess. And then I have two more books that go into a little bit of a different direction. One is Know My Name by Janelle Miller. This is my favorite book of all time. I think it's fantastic, it's wonderful, it's perfection. And in this book, Janelle Miller tells the story of her court case because she was the rape victim of the, what was it called, Stanford rape case? I don't know. All these American terms, I don't know. But basically, there was this huge case back in the day, a couple of years ago, that also started a lot of the like rape culture discussions, and she was the victim of that. And at first she wasn't mentioned by name, so one day she decided to write this book and to tell her story about this. And this is a fantastic book, also very harrowing read, because it really looks at the justice system in the US and how it is so hard for people who have been raped or have been sexually assaulted to actually go to court. It takes forever. It uprooted her life completely. And that's what she talks about in this book. But this is so much more. This book is perfection, and I just urge everyone to read it because it really shows how the current way our society works will always lead to sexual assaults happening. And lastly, we have Ace by Angela Chen, and this is a book about asexuality. So this is more of a, not like a memoir, but more of like general non-fiction book where you can learn about asexuality, which I would definitely recommend because that is something that also challenges a lot of the way that our society thinks people should be. And yeah, it's just a very good introduction in that topic. Last but not least, I have two short story collections that I wanted to mention. The first one is an anthology. It is called 1,000 Beginnings and Endings. And this book is great. It is an anthology of stories that are inspired by Asian mythology, and I don't know if they're all like sci-fi. It has been a very long time since I read it, but I remember really enjoying a lot of these stories, which is sometimes rare with an anthology because you never know what you get. But sometimes that's also very intriguing because maybe there is a lot of authors in there that you wanted to try. So yeah, I remember really liking this one and I would definitely recommend it. And the other one is a short story collection where all the short stories are written by the same person, and that is Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. I checked this one out because it has the short story that the movie Arrival was based on, and that is one of my favorite movies, so I wanted to read that story as well. And this collection is so interesting because the stories that are in there are from like a very like long period of time. So they're all very different, very unique sci-fi stories, and you also get like a little, yeah, like little contextualizations or like little reflections on each story at the end of the book. And I just really like that. It was so fascinating to have these like so different stories and know that one person wrote all of those. It was really great, and yeah, one of my favorite short story collections of all time. So these were all the books I wanted to talk about today. I hope you found something interesting that you haven't tried before. I guess this video will be very long, so I'm sorry for that. But yeah, I just wanted to share some of my favorites. So have a great day and I will talk to you soon. Bye!